Lawyers of Reddit, have you ever done a case you secretly hoped you would lose and why? Family lawyer here, associate, so I don't get to pick my clients yet. I had one where both parents sucked, heroin addicts. I had mom, but didn't want either parent to end up with custody. DFCS had been called but had deemed it not severe enough to warrant removing the child. So I ended up calling another lawyer and strategizing with her to represent the grandparents so they could intervene for custody. It worked. Child is with grandma and doing much better. Parents are still addicts. Not quite. But I did a trial where I won and the defendant came up after the guilty verdict and told me I did a great job and he thought I was excellent in trial. It was tough because sometimes you want the defendant to be mad at you to make it easier to send them to jail. This was honestly a guy who was taking responsibility for his actions. His mother was present, so it left me feeling weird. My friend used to be a plaintiff's personal injury attorney, and he told me this story today about how he lost his client some money. The client was trying to use his kid to get money from a car accident. Didn't just take the kid to the ER. He took the kid to a chiropractor. Tried to act like the kid was real hurt. Pro tip: kids don't get the kinds of soft tissue injuries that adults and especially the elderly can get. So my friend does some extra negotiating and gets most of the settlement money paid to the kid. His client doesn't realize until after the papers were signed that most of his money was going to sit in the court's registry and go to his kid when he turns 18. He got angry, and my friend was like, "I thought that's what you wanted. I got a lot of money for your kid's injuries." On the regular. Honestly, if I wasn't rooting for my client to lose, corporate litigation mostly, never worked alone. By the time I was done working with them I considered it a small victory. This was the main reason I'm what they call a recovering attorney now. I'm a divorce attorney. There are several people I've represented who aren't dangerous but are pretty itty parents. It's hard to help them fight for their kids without also fighting for them to be better parents. Fortunately, I live in a state where that kind of advice is allowed. Otherwise, I'd want many of my clients to lose. Defended a company that attracted a bunch of its employees with a profit-sharing incentive scheme. After 5 years, when the incentives were due to be paid, they tried to change the definition of profit in the employee contracts so they could argue that no incentives were payable. I was neither surprised nor unhappy when the judge told our clients they were full of it. Oh yes. A high-maintenance divorce client that was pitching a fit BC she was going to have to pay $60 a month in child support. She wanted a recalculation and I was praying she would have to pay more. Doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's usually because client didn't take my advice. Maybe client thought he could skip a certain step in a transaction to save money, usually, or time, same thing. In those cases I am rooting for it to come back and bite them in the rear. Sometimes it does. Sometimes there are no consequences. Bet you win some, you lose some. Or if client doesn't pay his bill, I secretly hope he gets in a situation where he suddenly appreciates my value. Or, in other words, I hope he needs me again real soon so that he'll pay up, and I can ask for advance fees due to past poor payment behavior. Speaking of, if I'm working a case where client has unreasonable demands or expectations and I just don't want to do it, but I have to because reasons, I just bill the hell out of them. Some folks pay for the privilege of being an asshole. Obligatory, not a lawyer, but a law student. My professors are both former prosecutors. They said that a lot of lawyers, particularly in the criminal world, have a lot of cases that they either don't care or hope to lose. For example, if you're a public defender and you're defending some sort of rapist, pedophile, etc., you really hope they lose or at least don't walk. Public defenders absolutely have the ittiest job in law enforcement. You get assigned to defend a rapist and sadly many times an uninformed public will associate you with defending him and his behavior. A lot of guys being defended by a PD are staring down the barrel of a lot of time, and their win is a favorable plea deal. So many PDs hope their clients do lose in the fact that they will still end up doing time. A PD is there, at least in the USA, to make sure a defendant's rights are protected and to make sure law enforcement follows proper procedures. On the prosecution side, there are sometimes pressures from the public, victims, etc., to get a conviction on someone. especially in a particularly nasty case. My professor said that many times like this, or smaller cases where they're thinking this really isn't a big deal, but outside pressures are forcing me to prosecute and they hope that the guy can walk. So yes, some lawyers do want to lose. Unless they're getting paid on contingency, then they absolutely want to win. Not me, but my mom had this case like 6 years ago where she had to defend a man who killed his ex-girlfriend's 1-day-old baby. I remember my mom would come home every day and just cry. She's had a lot of cases where horrible things happen to kids and she's always been so afraid something would happen to my brother or me. It really took a toll on her. Not really. If I for some reason can't stand someone, I'm not taking their case. Once I do represent someone, I begin to identify with his side and his version of the story. There's some psychological mechanism behind it, that once you take a position, you'll go to great lengths to justify this position both to yourself and to others. Don't know the English term for that. That's a bias you need to be aware of in order to calculate the risk for your client, because you tend to overestimate your chances of winning a dispute lawsuit once you found arguments for the case. Public defender. Definitely yes. Raped his own children. This post applies to several people I've defended. Not a lawyer, but I used to be a Lyft driver and drove a group of lawyers to a strip club once. One then told me about a case he did earlier in the year. The guy was on trial for murder and rape. The dude was apparently crazy as duck and nobody doubted he was guilty. He was actually chained to a chair with a mask on, Hannibal Lecter style. His job was to try to get him off. He said he would try his hardest to get him to walk, but prayed to whatever god was listening that he would ducking lose. The guy got life with no chance of parole. He was relieved, but then switched to a different law firm. Serial killer murdered a locally famous man in 2017. This victim owned a restaurant and was very popular in the city. He was a good human being. About 6 months after his murder, a lady comes in claiming his house was hers. Backtrack about 20 years. The client and the victim bought a piece of property together. They are both on the title. They split up and she leaves a property that is literally falling apart. The property was close to being condemned. The victim hasn't had contact with my client in 15 years. He did all the work on the house and paid off the mortgage. The victim's kids are suing my client for half the house. If there is a god, they would get all of it. In short, a house she had nothing to do with, that is worth 600k might be hers because a serial killer murdered the owner. She is a horrible person. I want to quit the firm over this case. Not an attorney, but I work for a state's county court judge. As a clerk I meet so many people and unfortunately there are people who you start to recognize. We have some defendants who have 2, 3 and 4 cases. Needless to say we are happy when they plead versus taking 2+ cases to trial. We also have defendants who are particularly needy, meaning non-compliant with pre-trial supervision, picking up new cases, failing to appear, sovereign citizens, etc. While I really do try to stay impartial, it is hard to watch trials where people are blatantly guilty, so it's nice to see juries affirm that. Defense attorney. Mix of retained clients and contract work with the state public defender's office when they have conflicts. All the time. Chilled 6 defense where the evidence is overwhelming and the client wants a trial. Sometimes they want a trial because they are psychopaths. Sometimes because they are so shamed they are in denial. And sometimes as a coping mechanism. It's easier to blame the victim, jury, cops, lawyers, and the judge than admit you ducked a child. My job isn't to like my client, or to lie for them. It's to be the gatekeeper. If the state wants a human to die in prison, then they have to follow the law. They need to legally present their evidence, follow the rules of evidence, and prove every element of every offense, no matter the guilt of my client. Duck them if they don't prove their case. They have detectives, their own investigators, technology before trial, that is, Celebrite and crime labs, technology at trial, smart boards, experts, etc. Friendly former prosecutors as judges, material witness warrants, second chairs, or clerks, and public perception on their side. All the ducking time. Family law is awful. The brother of a good friend of mine is a nationalist, skinhead, Thinks immigrants and not poverty is his main problem and likes weapons and stuff. He isn't an activist, participating in violent acts etc. Yet he is a total ass. My friend calls me one day. His brother was arrested for illegal possession of weapons. He was stopped while driving for a typical alcohol test and the police found a police baton in his trunk. He had bought it through dark web and he was stupid enough to carry it in his trunk. My friend begged me to help. I did. And I did it only for my friend, which I love very much. The guy 99% never used it or any other weapon as well. He is just a stupid bully who likes to appear dangerous. When we met he was so scared and it was really funny watching this pile of muscles shake like a girl in fear of going to jail. For a guy like this, I would never use any fake story or narrative to defend him. We just tried to prove that he didn't intend to use it, that he never was violent and it was just plain stupidity. I was hoping that he was sentenced. It is a misdemeanor, so he would get no jail time. But I'd hope for a nice fine or some tens of hours of social services at least. But the judge, for F's sake, liked the honesty. He sentenced him with parole, which means if he doesn't commit any crime in the next 2 years, he won't go to jail and his criminal record will stay clean. In the end, he was happy not to go to jail, but I scared the shit out of him, explaining in depth what would happen if he was caught for any illegal action from now on. And I think he will behave from now on. Immigration lawyer had a client sign up after having his visa cancelled as he was convicted for molesting his ex-partner's kid. I wasn't in a position in my firm to refuse clients because I'm a junior and senior lawyers would go nuts. We had multiple risk assessments since his offending, saying he was the lowest of low risk and testimony that he wasn't a pedophile. Got his visa back for him. Still don't know how I feel about it. I didn't want him to lose the case per se, I just wasn't expecting it to be successful. I'm an intern at a PD's office. You get these kinds of cases a lot. There are arsehole clients who lie to their attorneys, disobey very clear and simple instructions, get mad and demand Nelson hearings or file frivolous complaints with the bar. Then there's clients who are nice enough, but are clearly guilty and a danger to everyone around them. Trigger happy armed robbers, sexual predators, etc. The PDs fight like hell for these clients, as they should, but they also sleep just fine when they're found guilty and get put away. There's a dude I'm doing work for currently who's looking at an anywhere from 25 years to life without parole, and while I'm gonna do my best to make sure his discovery is in order so he can get the fair trial he deserves, I fully expect him to rot and I'm not terribly sad about it. I prosecuted 2 cases against a defendant for meth possession. They were slam dunks. Guy got arrested by the same officer at the same location and made the same admission. It was literally the same trial. He had several priors and faced a minimum of 2 consecutive prison sentences of 10 years each. He faced 20 years. I hoped he would be acquitted because that is a ducking insane amount of prison time for a small amount of meth. B. He was a vet who was injured in combat. And C. He was relatively young and had to use a colostomy bag. My arsehole boss wouldn't allow me to deviate from the office policy plea offer. Defendant goes to trial and is quickly found guilty. He should have testified. BC I wouldn't have objected to anything. The kicker was that when the first verdict was read, he let out a long, loud fart. It was the saddest fart I've ever heard. He ended up getting 10 years total. BC the judge ran them concurrently. After that, I got chewed out by my office for not arguing with the judge that he had to run them consecutively. All the time. I do family and criminal law. Custody cases are the worst because an intense one means at least one of the parents isn't actually concerned about the well-being of a child. They just want to win. I will always represent my client and their interests, but it is certainly difficult some days. I was just watching the OJ trial on court TV and always wondered how those lawyers could work for him, knowing 100% he brutally beat and murdered Nicole Simpson, regardless of how much he paid. I just don't understand how they could live with themselves. Yeah. Sometimes I get patents for clients. Sometimes I feel like the client has no business getting this particular patent. Never. My personal ethics mean I must do anything and everything for my client. Falling short of anything illegal or that could get me disbarred. I used to do criminal defense work and had a couple of clients I found to be very reprehensible. but I successfully was able to give them the best defense I could. I don't do any criminal defense work anymore, but not because of some of the reprehensible characters. I really didn't mind that. Just moved on to a different and better paying legal field. I worked for a firm that defended homeowners associations and primarily did default judgments against people who couldn't pay HOA dues. I was a debt collector. I hope I lost all my cases. I quit that job after 3 weeks. I represented a company when there was infighting among the partners. A few of the partners came to me with a plan to buy out another partner. However, this plan was essentially a way to duck this person over. I'm not sure if they thought I wasn't smart enough to figure it out, but when I called them out on it, they owned it and said that their plan was to dupe him into taking an offer and then screwing him. I pushed for an amicable resolution, that is, a fair deal, and they went along with that for a while. The partner they were trying to buy out was not willing to leave without negotiating, and my clients didn't want to hang around. They fired me and are now with someone else. I know the attorney they went to, and I can't imagine they're crossing the unethical line I wouldn't cross. The sad thing is that I really respected these folks, but they clearly did not have any respect for me or their partner. It was gross. Isn't this the type of question that a good lawyer would never answer? 2 times when I was not quite a lawyer but doing work experience student. 1. Pedophile in court after police found indecent images of children on his computer. Wanted him to go straight to prison just off of that. 2. I worked in my university's pro bono clinic. We received a request from a convicted pedophile who was already serving a prison sentence to review his case file to see if he could appeal the length of the sentence on the grounds that he had been sentenced under the wrong sentencing guidelines. Conducted an interview in prison with him and my supervisor. Was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. We thankfully couldn't assist. He was polite, and to my naive surprise at the age of 20, likable. Took a long time for me to reconcile those feelings against what I knew he had done. Counterbalance, work experience at a criminal firm. Defendant was a British veteran who had served in Northern Ireland. Became a drug addict and spiraled into a cycle of criminal behaviors. Clearly was suffering from PTSD and other mental health issues. Was in court for battery and actual bodily harm and was pleading guilty. I, for reasons surpassing understanding, ended up in the interview suite alone with him. I'll never forget how he broke down and described to me how he knew his life was out of control but couldn't seem to stop or break the cycle. How he so desperately wished he hadn't ended up back here and how he'd essentially watched his whole life destroyed. He was crying. I had no idea what to say or do, but I desperately hope he got the help he needed. Those experiences combined were enough to put me off ever practicing criminal law. I represented a major automotive service company that upcharged and needed products and services to an old car that they were not designed for. The products failed, killing 2 people and making a third an amputee. Pushing company policy as a defense, industry norm, and being instructed to degrade the moral character of the deceased was too much for me. Fresh out of law school I was working as a public defender. My guy was an unrepentant DUI who made the roads more dangerous for all of us. He got into a non-injury accident and the police took over an hour to arrive. The prosecutors called well-meaning but incredibly stupid people as witnesses. I gave my guy the best defense I could by making the witnesses look confused and at fault. By suggesting that it was possible that my guy was so stressed out by the accident that he started drinking after the fact to calm his nerves. He didn't testify himself, and there was no way to prove he was drinking before the accident. He got off, and about a month later, I quit. I've had to defend a hospital who didn't want to be held accountable for taking too long to admit a patient who died because of such delay. I was thrilled to see they lost, and disappointed to see how much they paid. As a public defender you often get clients that have racked up 6 separate complex cases plus a probation violation at once and insist on fighting every single one of them. Not out of a sense of justice or innocence, just an attempt to make things as difficult as possible for the pigs. They will take up an inordinate amount of your time that could be focused on your other cases with actual merit. Don't get me wrong, they are entitled to a defense and I do everything I'm ethically obligated to do to defend, but when I get a client playing games with taking all their cases to trial, I do secretly hope their PO files a revocation on them for not reporting or using drugs on a charge carrying greater time than they're facing on the pending charges, as that usually convinces them to wrap up their bullet cases as probation violations or summary hearings. You should read The Lincoln Lawyer. Criminal lawyer in the UK. I once defended a guy who killed his own newborn child because it was crying so much. Literally hurled the child against the wall. At the time I had recently become a father too. I wanted that guy to do serious time. The jury convicted him of murder and he got a 14-year custodial sentence. I found it really hard not to celebrate. Almost identical set of facts in a 1998 case RV Wallen, 1998. 2AC82. It's worth a read if you ever feel like you might be a piece of it. This will make you feel much better about yourself by way of comparison. I was a lawyer for a really bad corporate company and fighting against an environmental firm. We were polluting a lake and I was only in that job for the money. Not a lawyer but a friend is. He was working a case against a well-known company for undercooking food and causing a family to get food poisoning. He had told me about how this family is known to the company he works for and tries to gain money from crazy things. This time he said they had a reasonable case. He went on to speak with the family and asked which company it was. The mother responded with one company while the dad responded with a completely different company name. My friend then went on to accidentally bring this up in court. TLDR family tries to sue well-known company, makes mistake and lawyer accidentally brings up this mistake causing them to lose. My lecturer's story. Not a losing case but wishing the ground would swallow me up. I was used to work in family law, so would turn up to court and work with kids during divorce cases. One case I had to deal with a little girl and had to explain to her what the judge will ask her, which would be choosing which parent they wanted to live with. So my way of explaining it was, think about who you would have the most fun with, like I go ice skating, so who would most likely take you ice skating? The little girl was asked by the judge who she wanted to live with and in front of everyone pointed at me and said, I want to live with that lady. She goes ice skating. I felt my boss eyes burn through the back of my head. Ground swallow me up please. I had a client with a protective order against her ex-husband and the guy wanted to come get his belongings with some deputies along to make sure he stayed out of trouble. The husband made the motion to go get his stuff and I was there to oppose it. It was so unreasonable to not rip the band-aid off and just part ways, but she insisted on making this as rough as possible for the guy. I won when the judge suggested a clever idea to make things work logistically, but tediously, for the parties, but I really felt for the guy. He just wanted to take his stuff and I had to be there to shoot him down. I used to be an insurance defense attorney in-house for a big insurance company, and this happened to me all the time. It was usually because the facts and evidence would show that our defendant was at fault for something, but the insurance adjuster insisted that we fight it. I would do my best to explain to the adjuster why the evidence or law was against us, usually after I'd had time to gather the evidence and take plaintiff's deposition so I had the full picture. But at the end of the day, I had to proceed unless I was instructed to settle. Two stick out in my mind. 1. Case involved defending a driver who sped around the corner and hit kids crossing the street. I had to argue that the injuries weren't that severe because no bones were actually broken. 2. Case involved fighting our own insured client who had been in a hit and run accident. It was later discovered that the other driver had been high on meth when he ran the stop sign and plowed into the insured client. He had no insurance, so the client needed us, her own insurance company, to pay for her medical bills. But I was instructed to fight on it in every way possible. Minor accident. Not that hurt. Bills inflated. She's young so she'll be fine. etc. It all made me feel awful. The good news is that I have now switched over to the plaintiff claimant side and I'm so much happier. I can at least use everything I learned from being insurance defense to help my clients. Plaintiff's pile lawyer here. Can't say I've ever wanted to lose one. I've taken plenty that went sideways, but I've always managed to either withdraw from the representation early or resolve the case for something reasonable in light of changed circumstances. Plus I work on contingency, so taking BS cases is really bad business. The look on Robert Kardashian's face when the verdict was read said it all. Represented a guy at trial who had beaten up his girlfriend pretty bad. It was a loser. And the trial was more about what the punishment should be than whether he had done it. Jury was out for way too long. And when they gave the verdict, it was not guilty. I was astounded. It must be some kind of great lawyer. But no. One of the women on the jury held out, insisting he couldn't have done it in the face of overwhelming evidence of guilt. After the acquittal, we visited with the jury to get feedback about the trial. Judge, prosecutors and I wandered into the jury room and everyone's eyes were on this woman. She asked to meet my client. She had fallen in love with him at first sight from the jury box. I told her no, I couldn't do that to her, but his name was there to be known. And I think she got in touch with the guy later. But I really hope she didn't. Guy was an animal. Yes. It was a life insurance policy. The mother, who took out the policy, had done a number of things that caused the policy to lapse. A few years later she quickly died after being diagnosed with terminal cancer. She sued to enforce the policy, her estate continuing the lawsuits after she passed. Legally, she was wrong and my client the insurer was right. She ducked up and let the policy lapse so my client didn't deserve to pay out $1 million. But she had young kids and the dad was disabled and had a low paying job so I felt for them. In the end we settled for an amount higher than warranted given the risks involved taking it to trial. That is, the insurance company took a sympathetic view of the situation. Was a sad case all around.